It's Rylie.
It's Sloan.
It's Briar.
Hang on to your broomsticks.
It's about to get eerie.
Today's episode could contain themes and elements uncomfortable to some listeners. Please check the episode description and remember to always take care of yourself.
Okay, so starting out today, I have a Cajun theme happening for a little cryptid chat today. I'm going to start with the Honey Island Swamp Monster, or the Cajun Sasquatch, or the Louisiana Wookiee.
Louisiana Wookiee?
The Louisiana Wookiee is another name.
Tongue twister.
So those are all different names. They kind of describe the same creature. It's, the Cajun Sasquatch is a big thing, but they really call it the Honey Island Swamp Monster because that's where it's located, in St. Tammany Parish. So it's pretty much this big giant marshland, and it's really, really swampy. You think Louisiana, you kind of think this area is what you think when you think of that swamp. And one of the things I had watched, they kind of described it. They're like, if you walked 20 feet into it, you could get lost. You could walk a straight line and then have a hard time finding your way back out.
Oh.
So it's like all those big trees with those roots, all that. Very swampy. So that's where the Honey Island Swamp Monster is supposedly living, terrorizing.
That's where he resides.
He resides. It's the home of the Swamp Monster. And so his appearance is very much like Bigfoot, but a little different because some of the stories and the origins they have, and we'll get into that. But he's over 7 feet tall and weighs over 500 pounds.
Big boy.
Yeah, he's a hoss.
He's a big chunker.
He's a big one. And he's covered in fur. He has yellow reptilian eyes, and he stinks.
He stinks.
Stanky boy.
Yeah, all the stories talk about how bad he smells. And it's like rotting flesh, nastiness.
Oh.
But if he's covered in fur and he's living in the swamp,
He's mildewy.
he's a little ripe. Definitely gonna be a little ripe. The reptilian eyes, I don't know if it stems from a story, or I kind of wondered if it was maybe the sightings are mixed with like maybe some alligators, because there's some big old alligators out there, But I believe that a giant creature could be living in the swamp, because some of those alligators get so big. Mm-hmm. I'm like, that's a little dinosaur running around.
Well, and you'd never know, because how, you walk 20 feet and you're lost. There's no telling what could be in there.
Yeah. And they find, big, a 10-foot alligator is nothing to find, it seems. I mean, it's something, but, they catch them all the time.
Yeah.
And they're massive alligators. But the reptilian eyes stuck out. One of the stories, which was kind of funny, the origins it was actually hard to find a lot of stuff online. Everything was kind of the same, because I think this is more a story that generations and generations have shared, verbally. Maybe not generations, because the origins.
But it's more of a local.
Yeah, it's more locally. They tell the story. Everybody knows about it. And I think that's why it was hard to find online. Everything you found online was tied to the same person who was related to one of the ones that actually originally found it, and we'll talk about her. But I do think that's why it was hard, because you don't know those stories they're telling. But some of the origin stories, it started they said that there was a train that crashed, or the train derailed, but in this train, it was filled with circus animals. And so when it crashed, all the circus animals escaped into the swamps. And most of the animals couldn't survive in the swamp, except for the monkeys. And they say that then the monkey mated with the alligator and created the Honey Island Swamp Monster. But that's one of the other ones that people now, they're like, well, that's hard to believe because it's impossible.
Yeah.
And anytime I hear that, all I can think about is Rugrats when the train crashes and all the animals escape. And then Reptar, and I'm like, and that was the birth of the Honey Island Swamp Monster.
Was the monkey the male or the female?
I don't know.
And then was the swamp monster birthed alive or from eggs?
I don't think they got into it that much.
You know,
Well,
I need the facts.
I have a question. So, is the eyes the only thing that they say is reptilian? Because you said he's covered in fur, but is there any sightings of him with scales, like looking more like a reptilian?
There was a couple pictures like you look at where people have drawn it up, and it does look a little more reptilian. But when you look at descriptions, they're not. They're just saying he has the yellow reptilian eyes. But, you know, some of the images made more sense looking more reptilian to think that. But all I could really find was he's more Bigfooty, Sasquatchy, Wookiee-ish, if you will.
Because just in the way I'm thinking of it, more of a reptilian would make sense surviving in a swampy area than a Bigfoot. Just to me, that just sounds more...
There are quite a few things down there. And like the skunk ape and those different type of things. So there are some of those. And there was also stories in a YouTube video that I watched. There are supposedly stories of that, you know, monkeys could survive. Like in the swampy area. Primates could survive. And this one guy in one of the videos, he was talking about how some of the older people talk about how they think they shoot a squirrel out of a tree and out drops a monkey. And so there's people that have those stories because they said they could live down there. They don't really, but I mean, there's not native monkeys.
But they could
survive. Which kind of that story, you know, only the monkeys could survive from the circus crash. So I guess because they'd be in the trees. And if you think about the rainforest and place like that.
It's the closest to a swamp.
Yeah. So, but that was really it. And like I said, it was hard because there's different stories that people tell. So I kind of went one direction with what I could see as the origin. I think there's relationships to other stuff, and I'm going to talk about another cryptid type story that it ties into. Sometimes they all get smushed together. So, but as far as the Honey Island Swamp Monster, first time that he was seen and the first person to really talk about it was this guy named Harlan Ford and Billy Mills. Harlan was, I think he was a pilot, but they were flying over the area, and they had found an like abandoned little cabin or something, or a little area from the sky, and they were like, no, we want to check that out. So they like landed the plane and went to track it down. So they were searching for the area, and they found a clearing, and in that clearing, they saw the creature, and they said they locked eyes with it, and then it took off. He called it ugly and sinister, was how he described it. And then, so that was it. They just had that encounter. That was his initial story. That was in 1963. And then in 1974, they decided to go back, and they went back on a hunting trip, the same area, and they found, one thing talked about multiple boars. So I was thinking they like strolled up on a massacre of boars, just wild boars, which is kind of crazy because, you know, they're pretty mean. Mm-hmm. Wild boars are nasty.
Yeah.
But then another thing kind of only said it was like one boar, so I think it goes back and forth through the grapevine of what it was. But they stumbled across the carcass of a boar who was like shredded, like throat ripped out, really shredded, and they're like, nah, that's not how a gator does. You know, a gator's not gonna
something
do that.
Big and fast would have had to take down a boar. Because even watching like Swamp People and stuff, they say boars are worse than gators and stuff, and more dangerous because they're so fast and they're so mean.
Yeah,
and stuff. So something to shred a boar would have to be huge and fast.
Right. So I was like, man, and they said, you know, gators don't really do that. They don't attack and kill and leave it. You know, they're going to drag it.
And eat it.
And even if they don't eat it, they're going to drag it to the swamp, most likely, you know. They're not just going to attack it and, like, move on. So, now there are stories of, like, big cats being in the swamps. You know, but those are also few and far between. I think, like, panthers and stuff like that. Cougars. But, again, those two are, you know, few and far between. So, they're in this clearing. They found the boar. And they also found... Oh, this does go to the description. I forgot about it earlier. It's a little reptilian. they found footprints, and they are 3-toed and webbed footprints. So that is reptilian. And it's kind of hard to think about if it's over 7 foot and three toes, 3 webbed toes. I feel like he'd be hobbling along. But they made casts. They went back and made casts of those. And when you look at them, to me, I thought they looked like gator tracks. I was like, that could be a big giant alligator. But apparently they did send him to an expert, a track expert, and they said they couldn't, they didn't know what it was. They were like unidentifiable. But it is weird, and I even looked compared to an alligator, and I was like, those look alike. Mm-hmm. But when you see alligator tracks, they usually have a big line from where they drag their tails. Mm-hmm. So you got feet print, and you've got the tail dragging it. And he was a known hunter from that area, so you would think he would know. He would know a gator track. Right.
Yeah.
Unless he could have been fibbing, which we'll get into that. But I was like, well, we'll benefit of the doubt. We'll say there was no tail track. It was just these feet track. So, and he made all these casts, and you can look at those pictures and see them. But, so they were unidentifiable. And they are. They're 3 long-toed and webbed toes between. He never, and that was it, really. He just kind of had that story, and way down the line, after his death, his wife found a video that he had on a Kodak Super 8, so it was nice and old, and talk about today's cameras catching stuff like it's a potato. Yeah. It was really bad, and I looked at it, and I was like, like, it didn't give me strong vibes of anything I was impressed with. But it was kind of strange that he never released it. So even if they did that, why wouldn't he put it out there if he wanted it? Which his granddaughter, Dana Holyfield Evans, she is now really invested in it. She found some old letters that he has. She's done multiple documentaries and written books on it, because she wants to experience it, and it's what he did. She wants to kind of feel that connection, I guess. But she says the type of man he was like very well known and kind of influential, and he knew a lot of these big people. So she fully believes that he wouldn't have released stuff like this if he thought it would come back and hurt his reputation. It just wouldn't be worth it. But when his wife had asked about Dana Holyfield asked why they thought he didn't release it. And his wife had said he didn't want people to kill it. So she kind of said he hung on to it because he didn't want it out there. He didn't want people out there hunting it down. So, and that's a good way to be, in my opinion. He was so interested in it, and he didn't want to.
Well, because he knew exactly how it would be. If you say there's a creature out in the swamp, automatically there would have been hunting parties,
right,
and stuff to go kill it.
Right, because then they know it's out there. They're going to want to go get it and see it. So that could be why he kept it down, kept it hidden. It could have been a hoax, and maybe he didn't think it was good enough. So he didn't want to release it. We'll really never know why that was. There was another story of a man named Ted Williams, who is a big one that everybody knows, kind of saw the Honey Island swamp monster. And supposedly he actually saw them several times. He would see them. And he said it wasn't one, he said it was a group. And there was a group of these little swamp monsters living together. And Dana Holyfield Evans actually said she had a story where he said they came out of the water and shook, and like the water from their fur, he was close enough for it to hit him. And so shortly after that, he went out in his boat, which is pretty common. That's where he lived. He was always out hunting, always out in the swamp in his boat. And that was it. He never came back. And he was just gone. So they don't know what happened to him. But to add to the story, they say maybe Maybe he got too close. He always believed that they didn't wish him harm. He said they were just there. He kind of, clued him in that they might knew he was there, but they just seemed like, well, whatever, we're just chilling.
He ain't harming us, so we don't have to harm him.
Yeah.
Was his boat ever found?
No, I don't think so. They said it was just like, poof,
gone.
He's gone. So, but in my mind, all I can think of when I heard the story was like him out on this little boat. I'm just thinking like a little tiny one, not a big boat. And like a giant swamp creature jumping up out of the water. I don't know why I pictured it that way. But like creature from the Black Lagoon style and jerking him down. I do. I'm like, and it just leaped out and grabbed him and pulled him in the water, and that was it. And then the boat slowly sinks.
Yeah. Didn't you say earlier that like when he first saw it, it ran away from him?
That was.
Or was that?
That was the Harlan Ford.
Okay.
And Harlan, he was with a buddy, Billy Mills. Harlan Ford and Billy Mills saw him in '63, and they made eye contact, and he ran away. And so Ted Williams said he saw him multiple times, and it was a group of them, and they did their things, and he just kind of watched them.
I could see that, like what you said before. Maybe he didn't want people to go hunting and killing them, because if he's seen them multiple times and he was fine each and every time that he saw them, then he would think, oh, these are just creatures out here.
Well, that's Harlan Ford. I don't know how many times he saw him. The only times they talked about are the 2 times, really. And then he was always like out trying to look for him and get him and stuff. But Ted Williams was the one who was like, oh yeah, I see him. Like they were buddies.
Yeah, he's who I was meaning.
Yeah. And so then he went out and just, poof, never came back. So I did kind of look because being the Cajun Sasquatch, I was curious because I knew the Bigfoot craze was kind of around this time. And especially the film that he got of the swamp monster looked a lot like some of the iconic Bigfoot.
Strutting across the way.
Yeah. So I did look, and the Patterson Film, which is the big famous, everybody knows that Bigfoot film, where they think it's a girl and she's walking and she looks over her shoulder. So that actually came out in 1967. So I thought, when I was doing my research, I was like, well, maybe they were trying to jump on the Bigfoot craze. And they were going to create their own little, Honey Island Swamp Monster, Cajun Sasquatch. But his story was actually first. Because he saw him in 1963. And then the Patterson Film came out in 67. So that really was the beginning of the Bigfoot craze. The Bigfoot craze really peaked in the 70s. That's when Bigfoot was like, everybody was all about Bigfoot. Even though there's stories of Bigfoot earlier, that was the Bigfoot craze.
I feel like the 60s and 70s were when everything started getting big. Like Bigfoot, aliens, all this stuff started coming out.
All the drugs.
Oh, yeah.
It could have been. It could have been. I also wonder, though, if maybe, how I was telling you, I had a hard time with some of this research because it's word of mouth. So I wonder if there could be elements of that. They didn't have the technology, and, it wasn't, oh, I want to post, look at this creepy thing I got, let me post it on Instagram. Let me put it on Facebook and see what everybody thinks. So I wonder if it feels like it was a big craze because so many stories were going around, and everybody was like, oh, did you hear this story? Did you hear this story? So it wasn't just a Facebook post that people get in those comments and be like, hoax, that's stupid, blah, 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 how they get. It was, people were really intrigued in these stories and this storytelling and sharing the stories among everybody. So there was, like I said, Dana Holyfield Evans has a book called Swamp Monster Real Encounters in Louisiana's Honey Island Swamp. And she talks about that. And there's a YouTube video that I watched. And it was This Cajun Sasquatch is Terrorizing Louisiana's Swamp. And it was interviewing her, and they went along in the swamp, and she kind of they looked for tracks and stuff. But they also interviewed a pair of brothers who talked, and they fully believe, they're skeptics. They believe it's a hoax. They even believe they have proof that it was a hoax. Because his story, his name was Ricky Holyfield, and he says he was out and about in the swamp, and he saw this thing sticking up out of the ground, and it was like a foot. And he went and got it and pulled it out, and it was a fake foot attached to a piece of wood that was attached to a shoe. And they claimed that it was Harlan Ford's shoe, and that was used to make
the footprints.
They have it. You can look it up. In the YouTube video, they have it right out on the table. It's an old shoe. And it almost looks like a giant chicken foot is how I felt. Like, it looks like it's huge on the bottom, but it does look like the prints.
Yeah, so
they believed it was a hoax, and they claimed that there was a lot of publicity happening with the Honey Island Swamp Monster, including some big Hollywood production team that was planning on coming and doing a movie. So, supposedly right before the movie came, the sightings and the prints kind of seemed to increase. More the prints. There's not a whole lot of pictures of people think they caught it. There's only the one video that no one ever really released. Mm-hmm. You know, they found it after he died. But when this production company was talking and they were coming to film a movie, suddenly there was a lot more footprints. Well, Ricky Holyfield says once they found that foot, he was in the newspaper saying, "Oh, it's a hoax. We found this foot. It's a picture of him with the foot." Suddenly, the movie didn't happen, and the production company was over it. So, was it because they were making it more of a big deal because they wanted their movie to do well? You know, publicity stunts. That's nothing new. They do it nowadays. They did it back then. Or did they could have just stopped because, oh, it's a hoax. Never mind. Nobody's going to care now. So that's a possibility too. So, but they do say they believe it was a hoax, that they've never seen anything. And then Dana Holyfield Evans says that there was a bit of a family feud between, well, not a family feud because they're not related, between Harlan Ford and Ricky Holyfield. There were some territory issues because the hunting ground. So Ricky Holyfield and his brother and family didn't want people out hunting on their land. And Harlan Ford was talking about the swamp monster there. So she of course believes that she believes in the swamp monster. She's trying to actively seek it out. She thinks Ricky Holyfield and his brother were trying to discourage people from looking for it because they didn't want them on their land. She also says that he claims that shoe would have fit Harlan Ford, and she says there's no way. She says it's too small because Harlan Ford was apparently a bigger man. He was real tall. I think she said he was 6 foot something.
Oh,
and
yeah, very tall.
So he had a big foot, and this was a little tiny shoe. So there's still that back and forth between.
They just did it to be
right.
like.
Are they lying about it being a hoax just because they wanted to say no, he's lying? They wanted to discredit him. Is it a hoax? You know, it's one of those things. It's whichever side you want to look at. You know, but she goes out there all the time hunting for it, and she always takes her camera. She's always ready to catch that proof if she finds it. So maybe one day we will have proof of the Honey Island Swamp Monster in a picture form, more than, you know, footprints here or there. Maybe we'll have a photo or a video
that wasn't filmed on a potato.
And we will truly know if there's a Cajun Sasquatch out there. When I got rid of Joan, I was living alone on the banks of Brown Bayou Blue. I saw it one night in the fluorescent dock light, the creature called Lugaru, the beast known as Lougarou. Head of a wolf, arms of a man, teeth of a bat, it started to stand. It grimaced and growled at the rising moon in a guttural howl and a horrible croon. It wailed out its name to the curd-colored moon. Luga, Luga, Lugaroo, Luga, Luga, Lougaroo. To a barbaric beat it stomped its feet, filling its mouth with a fistful of meat. As I bolted the door, it howled once more. I covered my ears and crouched on the floor. That was then, this is now. Joan took me back, I don't know how. I sold my camp and we live in town, but on a full moon I still hear the sound. I heard it that night on the bayou blue. I still hear the Lougaroo. Luga, Luga, Lougaroo, Luga, Luga, Lougaroo. That's a poem called The Lougaroo by Joshua Clegg Caffrey, and it's in a book called In the Creole Twilight, Poems and Songs from Louisiana Folklore. And that segues us from our Honey Island swamp monster to the Rougarou, which we're keeping it Cajun because the Rougarou is considered the Cajun werewolf. Lougarou is the French of it, which is essentially a werewolf. But the Louisiana French dialect turns it into Rougarou, which is what we're going to call it from here on out. Which, I like the Rougarou because it's kind of funny to me. I just enjoy saying it. And when I would watch Supernatural with Brett, we would always try and guess what the creature would be. And I'd be like, the Rougarou. And he thought I was making it up until one episode when they were like, oh, we're chasing a Rougarou. And he was like, what? What? I was like, I thought you made that up. He thought I just made it up. I was like, no.
I mean, that's not above you.
That's true. That's valid. But I didn't, because the Rougarou is a real legend. So, appearance-wise, and you hear it in the little poem, it is a werewolf. The body of a man, head of a wolf or a dog. It's even been described as just a shapeshifter in general, different creatures, or a skinwalker. That says you could always tell in France and Louisiana, they said you could ID people because they had long nails, red eyes, and a single eyebrow was a sign if a person was a Rougarou.
That was just a single eyebrow?
A single eyebrow. So, initially, I was thinking one eyebrow.
Oh,
one
a unibrow.
I think it was
like, that's just a bad day at the spa. Like, that's just a bad day at the salon.
I like how we all thought just one singular eyebrow, not a unibrow.
That was I was like, that would be weird to see one arching eyebrow. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute. A unibrow. That would make sense. Mm-hmm. So, a unibrow. Or a single eyebrow. I don't know. It could be a single eyebrow.
Frida is shaking in her boots.
Was she a Rougarou? Find out next time. So, werewolves, they have a ton of lore and legends, and they go back forever, and a lot of different cultures have their own version of it. So, there's even connections between, the Lugaru, our Rougarou, and the Wendigo. So Native Americans talk about the Wendigos because there's a lot of things that overlap. So, like the Wendigo, people would turn into a Wendigo after sometimes greed or hunger, and they end up eating people. And once they eat human flesh, then they turn into the creature of the Wendigo. And that's kind of... It's not really similar. It is a little similar to the origins of the Rougarou because it started as really a cautionary tale for kids to keep them out of the swamp. So they would say, don't go near the swamp, the Rougarou will get you. But a big chunk of it was based around Catholics. And the Rougarou is known for going after Catholics who ignore Lent. Or it was like if they skip Lent for 7 years, you become a Rougarou. So it was like a scare tactic to keep them, from doing their thing. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that was kind of interesting that it had Catholic ties specifically, which it could come from the area. Down, Louisiana, I guess there's quite a bit of the Catholic style, maybe the French. But, or there's also, if you're in Louisiana, there's voodoo. So they said it could be a curse. A lot of the stories say it's a curse from a voodoo priestess.
That's what I think I've heard when I've heard about the Rougarou, is that it's a curse put on someone.
So, and it's usually it's some form of punishment. So when you're a bad person, you don't get cursed if you're a good person. It's kind of, I think, the way they try to say. So you don't want to, if you were good and doing everything you're supposed to, you wouldn't have been cursed. But, and there's a lot of different stories, too, that you can kind of pull. One thing says it's just a 101-day curse. And then some say that it's forever. Then some even take that 101 days and they say you have 101 days to pass it on to somebody else. And if you don't after 101 days, then you're forever stuck as a Rougarou.
That's just a bad game of tag.
Yeah, so you don't know. You don't know what's going to happen. And then, so getting rid of it and passing the curse on, there was a story about how when they're in there, they're transformed into their wolf-like shape. Or a lot of these stories, it's a dog. They're like as a really big, aggressive dog. And they'll follow a person around or like really try and entice the person to attack them. Because you need someone to cut you and draw blood so that you're free of the curse. And then they're cursed.
That's interesting that you brought that up, because I watched an episode, it's called Monsters and Mysteries in America, and it's people's point of views with creatures. One of them was the Rougarou, and he was a boy, and he was watching over his sister, and they got attacked by a Rougarou, and he grabbed a knife and cut its arm, and it went away. Like, it fled from him. And then the next day, he went on the docks to help his uncle, and his uncle had a bandage around his arm. Or it was his uncle or cousin, but they had a bandage on his arm where he cut that creature.
Interesting.
That is interesting.
Do you remember how that story went?
That's as far as I know, is that it happened that night, they got attacked, and he sliced the arm of the creature, and then the next day when he was going to help, he saw his family member had a bandaged arm. And then he went on, like, he didn't ask him about it. Actually, I think he fled from him, and then it just went away. Like, they didn't talk to him after that, or something like that happened. It was just kind of dropped.
There's a story that I heard, and it was a similar thing. A young boy, and the dog shaped being chased him around, and he cut him, and it says that once sliced, the Rougarou would turn into its human form, revealing its true identity to the individual who cut him. And then there was like a pact between them, and that person couldn't reveal their identity. But if they mentioned the incident to anybody, then they would become the Rougarou.
I think that may have been
part of that legend, yeah. So, and I saw that, and again, that was a different take on it. Sometimes they say once you cut, you get it, and they'll even go as far and say you have 101 days. So there's a mix of the different origins too. But I did see that where you can free that person, and then if you break that bond, you break that pact, then you have to deal with it. Which could be that could also be another lesson of when you make a pact with somebody, you keep your mouth shut. Snitches get stitches, or you become a Rougarou.
There we go.
That's how it goes. There's also, they say that a Rougarou, even if they've been cured and they don't turn into the Rougarou, that they can curse others who misbehave just by making eye contact. So even once you lose it was like you have the ability to turn other misbehaving people into a Rougarou.
So it's taking the mama stare to a whole nother level.
Yeah. Yeah, so you start misbehaving and someone's going to make eye contact with you, they could be a Rougarou. So you better watch out, because anybody could be a Rougarou. And if they catch those eyes, don't you cut your eyes at me. Make you a Rougarou. There was a quote on the curse and why you're cursed in a newspaper called The Vermilion, or it's on their website. And it is, if someone behaves lowly, one will be knocked down to a lower state, that of a beast. So it was, that's the punishment of behaving so bad. You want to behave not like a human, well, then you're going to become a beast. So I thought that was kind of an interesting take on it. There's other beliefs with it. They call it the Lugaru Ball. And so at this Lugaru Ball, they ride on bats, and they all gather in the swamp and have a party and like a wild Lougaroo get together. And it also talked about that they will ride on their bats and they will drop down chimneys and suck your blood to make you one of them, which leans more towards a vampire style haunting, or it even was tied into them just standing beside your bed and just like kind of disturbing your sleep. So there's ties to a story or an entity called a Kushma. It was this being that would really just disturb your sleep. So this tied to some sleep paralysis encounters, and it says they vary, but there's always a bit of the same, and that the Kushma would come into the room. So an individual would wake because they sense it in the room, and when they wake up, it would be on top of them, and they're unable to move or make noise. So like with sleep paralysis and sleep paralysis demons. So they tied those two legends together. So they say the Rougarou drops down in on those bats and kind of does the same thing.
Okay, so with the ball, when it's saying that they ride on bats, is it like the creature, like a bat, like an animal, or like a baseball bat?
And they got one eyebrow, and they're riding on Louisville Sluggers.
Well, I just didn't know, because, like witches and broomsticks,
Yes, yeah. It's bats. Like giant bats.
Giant bats, okay.
Because all these monstrous bats.
Yeah.
That's
why I was wondering, because I was like, if they're trying to be realistic, like how big, those bats gotta be big.
Yeah.
Does that mean Santa Claus is a Rougarou?
Maybe. And if you misbehave,
that's why he's
Krampus.
got the naughty list.
Yeah.
He's gonna have his names to.
He's gonna jump on top of you and wake you up, and you can't scream.
No wonder I was scared of him when I was little.
Hear you make a peep.
That's interesting, though. I had no idea about the ball or the dropping down chimneys. It is funny, though, that vampire creatures and werewolf creatures get mixed in a whole lot with each other.
Well, that's what, when I was doing my research on the Honey Island Swamp Monster, it led to the Rougarou, and I was like, oh, I gotta talk about that. Because there's ties between the Sasquatch-like creature and the wolf-like creature, and then ties to shapeshifters. So I always think it's interesting when all these stories tie together in some way. Is all these legends and all these creatures, the more you dig and the more research you do, the more connections you see. So it makes me wonder what if all these creatures are like part of one bigger entity?
They all get passed down to the sleep paralysis so doctors can just tell you that it's nothing.
Yeah, you're anxious and stressed.
But that's one reason why I tend to believe a lot of creatures is because it's in so many different cultures of different varieties and stuff. And just like you said, it could be a werewolf, it could be a skinwalker, which ties into Native American stuff, but also like the Wendigo is another Native American thing. But if it's bringing in vampires and werewolves, that goes even further to like Greece and other countries too and cultures. So in my opinion, it's just with all these places believing in stuff that's very similar, there has to be something out there. Whether it's supernatural or not, it could be just a creature that we don't know yet. by science.
Right, that's what I think. There was something that started these stories. They didn't just wake up and they were like, the Rougarou is going to get you, you got to behave. Well, something had to start with something that was so dangerous. Or they would have been like, stay out of the swamp because the gators.
Yeah.
Or something specific that we know of. Why was there these wild stories to keep kids out of a dangerous place?
Exactly.
When I'm like, you say stay out there, there's gators, I'm like, yes, ma'am.
No problem.
Yeah,
Heck, the mosquitoes would get you before the gators would.
I'd turn into one big bug bite.
I'm not going in the swamp. I'll stay in that house. So, I definitely thought that was interesting. And then the tie with the Kushma in there. But the Rougarou has a huge place in some Louisiana traditions. There is actually a Rougarou Fest that is in Huma, Louisiana. And this year would have actually been the 10th annual one. It was October 22nd through the 24th. But they've actually just canceled it this year to work on the recovery efforts for Hurricane Ida. But I thought that was pretty interesting that every year they do a festival and people will dress up in their wolfy Rougarou outfits, and it's like a big Halloween party and honor that tradition of those stories that they're really working to continue passing on because it's a big part of the culture. The Rougarou, the legend of the Roo. So it's pretty cool. And there is even the zoo in New Orleans, and I'm not sure on the pronunciation. The Audubon Zoo in New Orleans has an exhibit on the Rougarou. So they've got a big statue and stuff talking about the Rougarou. So it's like something that they recognize deeply as, a creature.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool too, because there's not a zoo exhibit for Bigfoot necessarily up in the mountains, or they really kind of honor that tradition of the Rougarou.
And I'm sure they all listen to their mamas when they say stay out of the swamp.
Yeah, and that's something that when I watched some stuff and read some stuff, they still say that. They still say, watch out for it. There's stories, I read some stuff on Reddit, and there's still some tradition of you don't say it out loud outside near the swamp. Don't mention the Rougarou. They're like, don't say that, it'll hear it. It'll come.
I think that's the same thing with skinwalkers. I think, if you say it so many times, if you say it, it draws them to you.
Yeah.
It isn't with skinwalkers, too. They'll try to get you to answer back, and you're supposed to ignore. If you hear anything in the woods, like a voice or something, you're supposed to ignore it. Because if you answer back, it's gotcha.
Yeah. It's on you. Yeah. There's a lot of Appalachian, wives' tales and folklore stories about stuff like that, too. And, the whistlers. If you're ever out in the woods and you hear something whistle at you, you ignore it and get out of there. It's that same thing if it's trying to get your attention, and once it gets your attention,
it's locked onto you.
Mm-hmm. So, and that's some of the ways that you could protect yourself from a Rougarou was you can place 13 coins on your doorstep or windows, and it is actually because the Rougarou will stop to count. Like a lot of the other creatures we've looked at, and a lot of them are that way. What was the one we just did?
Well, vampires and also the boohag.
Yes, the boohag.
Counting the things on the broom, the pieces of straw on a broom. Yeah.
Which is, the boohag reminds me of the Kushma.
Yeah.
Because it's very similar to the same thing, where it would disturb your sleep, linked to the sleep paralysis. And it was 13 coins specifically because once the Rougarous turn into a beast, they can't count past 12. So they can count to 12, and then that 13th one
throws them
confuses them, so they keep trying to count. It also mentioned, or you can put a colander on your doorstep, so they count all the holes in the drain. Or even a screen door will protect you from a Rougarou, which is very interesting. And I wondered if that stemmed from, it's hot in the swamp. But if you got that screen door and you keep your screen door shut, you're protected because they're going to stop and count all those holes in the screen.
Well, and obviously that's a big southern thing. You always have a screen door.
Mm-hmm. Yep, so that's a protective barrier from the Rougarou.
That's interesting.
That is interesting.
Which also, the Kushma is the same way, obsessed with counting, like the Buhag. So they're probably really. I didn't deep dive into the Kushma research, but I would say that they're extremely related to the Buhag story, because the same thing, the counting stops them.
This is. I just thought of it, and it's kind of not what we're talking about. But I'm wondering, you know how they say if you line salt to protect yourself? I'm wondering, because I know salt is like a purity thing, but I'm wondering if it's also about counting.
Because all the grains?
All the grains
Yeah, so they
of
stop.
salt.
What is it? I think fairies, I know there's something that you spill in front of them and they stop to count it. I can't remember if it's salt or sugar too, but it's all something about they'll count it. With the Rougarou, it actually said that they will count it until the sun rises up and then slink back to the swamp. So they won't stay there forever. So you won't catch one sitting there counting its coins over and over. But they'll only do it till the sun comes up, and then
It protects you for the night.
Mm-hmm.
They see the sun coming up and they're like, dang!
I still
Again?
don't know. I'll try again tomorrow. So, which that's pretty cool. And I tried to do some like encounters, if there was anything specific recently. And it's definitely one of those areas where it's just a lot of the stories and the lore and the legends. But there was some stuff as recent as the 80s. And I can't remember exactly where it was. But there was a bunch of livestock deaths that were happening in this area. And the sheriff was actually quoted as saying that he carried silver bullets dipped in holy water.
He was
Just
ready
in
to
case
go.
Yeah.
for that Rougarou. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I mean, they fully, there's firm beliefs in it. So, and I personally believe, when there's beliefs that are that firm in something and there's that much energy that's put into them, it's got to come from somewhere. And if they're going to tell me there's a Rougarou in the swamp, all right, it's good enough for me.
Yeah, add it to the list of why I'm not going into the swamp.
Fine by me. I'll put my coins by my window and my door. Make sure there's a screen door. I'll throw a colander out there, a couple brooms. We'll just, whatever.
Doing all the protection.
I'll get some, counting cubes, whatever I got to do. Some little blocks. I'll just have all these buckets of stuff, little individual things.
Marbles, crystals.
Yeah, whatever
Have some
I
poppy
need.
seeds over here.
Yeah. But whatever I got to do to keep them out. Because you never know. Why take a chance?
There might already be a Rougarou in your house.
That's true.
Because do they have to stay in the swamp? Because the way it made it sound was that, someone with one eyebrow, red eyes, long nails, so, it seems like they kind of just...
They would slink away to the swamp and then turn back into their human form. And then go on. About their normal business. And you would never know. Don't make eye contact. Thanks for hanging out with us.
Until next time,
Remember, you can find us on
Our own website,
Facebook,
Instagram,
YouTube,
Twitter.
and even Pinterest.
links are in the description.
As always, stay weary.
Stay leery.
And stay eerie.